Hey guy! Before we dive into today's video, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Your feedback is super important to me, and it helps me create even better content for you guys. Let's get this conversation started. My name is Alex, and London was suffocating me. The endless gray skies, the tube rush, the constant hum of the city, it was all too much. I desperately needed to escape. So, when I stumbled across a listing for a remote cottage in Dartmoor National Park, Devon, I booked it instantly. Wild moorland, fresh air, and proper quiet. Exactly what I needed. The drive was longer than I anticipated, winding through narrow country lanes that got progressively more isolated. My phone signal vanished miles ago, and by the time I reached the track leading to the cottage, dusk was settling in. The lane was barely more than a rutted path, flanked by gorse and heather, and overshadowed by craggy tors that loomed against the fading light. The cottage itself was isolated. Definitely more remote than the photos had suggested. It was small, built from gray stone, and nestled in a hollow surrounded by a vast expanse of moorland. The air was damp and carried the scent of peat and wild thyme. I unlocked the heavy wooden door, the key was under a loose stone as promised, and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit and smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp stone. There was a single room with a small kitchen area, a sturdy oak table and chairs, and a worn leather armchair. A low doorway at the back presumably led to the bedroom and bathroom. I flicked the light switch by the door, and a soft yellow glow filled the room, casting long, still shadows across the stone walls. Cozy, I muttered to myself, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. Unpacking was quick. I planned on hiking and exploring, mostly. I made a cheese sandwich, ate it at the table while listening to the profound silence outside, and decided to find the bedroom. The bedroom was even smaller than the main room, just enough space for a double bed and a small bedside cabinet. There was a small window looking out onto the moor, but it was pitch black out there, and I could only see my reflection staring back. As I was about to turn away from the window, I noticed something strange. Scratches. Long, deep scratches on the outside of the window frame, running downwards at an angle. They looked old, weathered, but definitely not natural. Like something had tried to rake its claws down the stone. A chill prickled my skin despite myself. Badger claws, maybe? Or a wild cat. This was Dartmoor, after all. Supposed to be wild. I drew the thick curtains closed, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling the scratches had given me. I was tired from the journey, and sleep was very appealing. I got into bed, pulled the woolen blankets up, and switched off the bedside lamp. Darkness descended, thick and complete. The silence was even more intense now, pressing in on my eardrums. Too silent. London's silence was just a muted backdrop. This was something else, a deep, watchful quiet. Then I heard it. A soft scratching sound, coming from outside the bedroom window. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My heart leaped in my chest. I lay rigid, listening, every sense on high alert. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was rhythmic, persistent, and definitely coming from the window. Not branches tapping, there wasn't a tree close enough. Not an animal rooting around, this was too high up, too deliberate. Slowly, my hand reached out for the bedside lamp. My fingers fumbled for the switch, found it, and clicked it on. The dim light filled the room, pushing back some of the oppressive darkness. I held my breath and listened. Silence. The scratching had stopped. I lay there for a long moment, listening, straining my ears. Nothing. Just the heavy, watchful silence of Dartmoor. Right, I whispered to myself, my voice sounding weak and shaky in the still room. Right, just a badger. Probably just marking its territory. But deep down, a cold dread was coiling in my stomach. The scratches on the window frame, the unnatural silence, and now the scratching at the window in the dead of night. It felt like more than just an animal. I told myself I was being ridiculous, city stress making me jumpy. But as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out here. And whatever was outside, scratching at my window, wasn't just territorial. Sleep was out of the question after that. Every groan of the cottage, every sigh of the wind across the moor, whether real wind or imagined, sent a jolt of fear through me. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the low ceiling beams, listening, waiting for the scratching to return. It didn't. But the silence itself felt charged now, like the moor was holding its breath, listening back. When a weak, gray dawn finally seeped through the curtain gaps, I was wrecked but jumpy. I got out of bed, pulled on some warm clothes, and went straight to the window. The scratches were still there, just as deep and unnerving in the pale light. I peered at the ground outside the window. Just rough grass, heather sprigs, and granite stones. No paw prints, no trace of whatever had made that scratching noise. I needed strong tea. And maybe some proper daylight to chase away the creeping unease that had taken root in my mind. The kitchen area was basic but had what I needed. I found some tea bags, filled the kettle from a stone sink, and lit the gas hob. As I waited for the kettle to whistle, standing at the front window, I looked out at the moor. Daylight did offer some relief. The tors still loomed, ancient and silent, but in the morning gloom, they seemed less menacing, more watchful. A few hardy birds were calling out across the moor, and a sheep bleated somewhere in the distance. Normal Dartmoor sounds. Maybe I was just letting my imagination run wild. I decided a walk was essential. Fresh air, exercise, and bleak daylight, that was the cure for a night of nerves in a lonely cottage, right? I grabbed my rucksack, filled a flask with tea and stuffed some biscuits in, and headed out. The paths around the cottage were wild and exposed. Rolling moorland stretched in every direction, dotted with windswept hawthorn trees and outcrops of granite. The sky was a heavy, low gray, and the air was damp and bracing, smelling of peat and rain. For a while, I managed to push the scratches and the silence and the prickling fear to the back of my mind. I just walked, breathed in the moor air, and tried to appreciate the desolate beauty. Hours passed. I walked further onto the moor, following sheep tracks that wound between the heather and gorse. I saw no other people, just the moorland ponies grazing in the distance, and the occasional buzzard circling overhead. It was the solitude I'd come for, amplified by the vast, empty landscape. Eventually, a chill wind started to pick up, and the weak daylight began to fade. Time to turn back. I checked the compass on my phone, still no signal, naturally, and started retracing my steps. That's when I realized I was properly turned around. Not completely, heart-stopping lost, but disoriented in the featureless expanse. The moorland looked the same in every direction, the tors all identical stony shapes on the horizon. I'd been too absorbed in my thoughts and hadn't paid enough attention to the landmarks, and now I was uncertain which way led back to the cottage. I pulled out my phone again, pointlessly, then swore under my breath. Idiot. Relying on tech in the middle of nowhere. Right, don't panic, I told myself. Just keep walking downhill. The cottage was in a slight hollow, so downhill must be the way. And I remembered crossing a small stream earlier. If I could find the stream, I could follow it down. I started walking, choosing what felt like the downward slope. The moor seemed to grow darker, even though it was still afternoon. The mist was thickening, swirling around the low hills, blurring the edges of the landscape. The birds had fallen silent, replaced by a deeper, heavier quiet. And then I heard it again. Not the scratching this time. Something else. A sound carried on the damp air, faint but distinct. Humming. A low, wordless hum, drifting across the moor. Like someone humming to themselves, quietly, tunelessly. But there was no one else out here. I hadn't seen a soul all day. I stopped walking, my pulse quickening. Listened. The humming came again, closer this time. And was it my imagination, or was it resonating in the air itself? The sound stretched out, almost droning, vibrating through the silence. I started walking again, faster now, trying to put distance between myself and the humming. But it seemed to follow me, weaving through the mist, always just out of sight, always just within earshot. Louder now, definitely louder. And was it getting closer? It sounded like it was circling me, moving through the mist, keeping pace with my quickening walk. A cold dread started to rise, icy and sharp. I broke into a jog, stumbling across tussocks of grass and heather, ignoring the sharp stones underfoot. I didn't know where I was running, just away from the sound, away from the humming. It was just behind me now. I could feel it, sense it, the presence just beyond the swirling mist, humming, always humming. The sound filled my head, blurring out everything else, a deep, resonant, unnatural sound. I tripped, my foot catching in a rabbit hole, and I went down hard, sprawling onto the rough ground. The breath was knocked out of me, and I lay there for a moment, winded and terrified, listening. The humming stopped. Silence. Utter, thick silence. Even the wind seemed to have dropped. I pushed myself up, scrambling to my feet, adrenaline flooding my system. I scanned the mist around me, heart hammering, expecting. What? I didn't know. But something was out there. I could feel it. And then I saw it. Just a flicker of movement at the edge of the mist, behind a jagged outcrop of granite. Something pale, indistinct, shifting in the swirling gray. I froze, every muscle locked, staring at the place where I'd seen the movement. Holding my breath, waiting. And then, slowly, deliberately, it stepped out from behind the rocks. It wasn't human. Not like any person I had ever encountered, or even seen in a nightmare. It was tall, unnaturally tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and gaunt, almost skeletal in its leanness. Its limbs were too elongated, too fragile looking, and its skin was wrong again. Pale, yes, but with a grayish, clay-like pallor. It seemed to ripple in the shifting mist, as if it wasn't quite solid, its edges blurring into the fog. I could almost see the granite behind it distorting through its outline. It had a head of sorts, balanced on a neck that seemed too slender and elongated to support it. But there were no features, not that I could make out. Just a smooth, stretched oval shape, the same gray-pale color as the rest of it. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blankness where a face should be. And yet, somehow, I knew it was focused on me. I could feel its attention, or whatever passed for its awareness, fixed on me, cold and intensely curious. The silence stretched, broken only by the frantic hammering of my pulse in my ears. We stood there, unmoving, facing each other across the patch of open moor in the swirling mist. Me, frozen by a primal dread, and it, just observing, humming faintly under its breath. Then, slowly, it shifted. It didn't step, not in the way a person or animal steps. It flowed forward. It seemed to glide across the rough ground, its long limbs moving with a boneless, unsettling fluidity. It closed the distance between us with a terrifying, silent speed, as if propelled by the mist itself. Panic finally shattered the paralysis. I spun around and bolted. I didn't think, didn't plan, just ran blindly. Back the way I thought I'd come, stumbling through the heather, sharp gorse snagging in my clothes, stones twisting under my ankles. I could hear it behind me, not footsteps, but a soft rustling, a whispering sound, like mist itself swirling faster across the moor. It was keeping pace, no effort, no sound of exertion, just gliding. I risked a desperate glance over my shoulder. It was still there, flowing through the mist, impossibly close, impossibly silent except for that faint, unsettling hum. And the humming started to rise in pitch, becoming more distinct, more resonant, a mocking, triumphant sound. Hmm. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, muscles screaming, raw terror lending me a frantic, unsustainable burst of speed. I had to get back to the cottage. That single thought hammered in my brain. Cottage, shelter, lock the door, get away from it. But was the cottage even safe? The scratches on the window. Had it been trying to get inside all along? The thought ignited a fresh surge of fear, adrenaline flooding my veins. I burst through a final curtain of mist and tripped, sprawling onto the uneven ground. The air rushed from my lungs, and I lay there for a moment, winded and utterly terrified, listening. The humming stopped. Silence. Absolute, oppressive silence. Even the wind seemed to have died away completely. I scrambled back up, pushing myself to my feet, every nerve screaming. I spun around, desperately scanning the swirling mist, heart hammering, expecting. What? I still didn't know. But it was out there. I could feel its presence, a cold weight in the air. And then I saw it again. Just a flicker of movement at the edge of the swirling mist, behind a cluster of windswept hawthorns. Something gray-pale, indistinct, shifting in the fog. I froze, every muscle locked tight, staring at the spot where I'd glimpsed movement. Holding my breath, waiting, praying it wouldn't move again. And then, slowly, deliberately, it drifted out from behind the hawthorns. It was closer now. Much closer. close enough to see details, or rather, the lack of them. The smooth, featureless head. The way its form seemed to waver at the edges, like heat haze. The unnerving stillness of its posture, even as it flowed closer. The humming started again, very faint, almost subsonic, but I could feel it more than hear it, a vibration in my bones, a resonance in the damp air. I took a step back, then another, moving slowly, silently, away from it. Hoping, desperately, that if I didn't provoke it, if I didn't make a sound, it would just let me go. It flowed forward again, matching my pace, keeping the distance between us constant. The humming grew a little louder, a little more insistent. I backed away faster, stumbling over the rough ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It kept pace, effortlessly, silently, always just out of reach, always watching, always humming. Panic clawed at my throat, choking me. I turned and ran again, blindly, desperately, sprinting back towards the direction I thought the cottage lay. Mist swirled around me, thick and disorienting, blurring the landscape, making it impossible to see where I was going. I could hear it behind me, the soft rustling, the faint humming, always there, always following. It was toying with me, I realized with a sickening lurch of fear. It could catch me whenever it wanted. It was just playing. Then, through the swirling mist, I saw it. A faint, blurry shape in the distance. The cottage. Thank God, the cottage. Salvation. Maybe. Hope surged through me, a desperate, fragile thing. I pushed myself to run faster, ignoring the burning in my lungs, the stitch in my side, the raw terror that clawed at my mind. Just a little further, just a little further. I burst through a final swirl of mist and stumbled into the small hollow where the cottage sat. It was there, thank God, just a few yards ahead. Sanctuary. I sprinted for the door, fumbling in my pocket for the key, my fingers numb and clumsy with cold and fear. Found it, jammed it into the lock, twisted, and shoved the heavy door open, falling inside. Slammed the door shut, through the heavy bolt, and leaned against it, gasping for air, heart hammering like a trapped bird against my ribs. Safe. I was inside, bolted in, safe. I stood there for a long moment, listening, straining every nerve. Silence. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing in the small stone room. Had I lost it? Had I finally escaped? Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself away from the door, backing into the center of the room, scanning the small window, the thick stone walls, every shadow in the dim light. Nothing. The cottage was silent, empty, or so it seemed. Then I heard it. Faint, almost imagined, but undeniably there. A soft scratching sound coming from the heavy wooden door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My blood turned to ice. It had followed me. It was outside, right outside the door, scratching, just like it had scratched at the bedroom window the night before. But this time it was at the only door. The only way in. I backed away from the door, slowly, silently, moving towards the back of the cottage, towards the low doorway to the bedroom. Maybe I could barricade myself in there. Maybe the thick stone walls would offer some kind of protection, some kind of delay. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Louder now, more insistent. And now, I heard another sound. A low, groaning sound coming from the solid oak door itself. Like something immensely strong was pushing against it, testing it, flexing its weight against the ancient wood. Groan, groan, creak. The groaning turned into a deep creak, and I heard the protesting shriek of wood under immense pressure. The scratching stopped, replaced by a new sound. A splintering, cracking sound coming from the heavy door itself. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of oak splitting, shattering, being forced apart with inhuman strength. It was breaking through the door. It was getting in. I reached the bedroom doorway, fumbled for the latch, and stumbled inside, slamming the low door shut behind me as frantically as I could. There was no lock, no bolt. Pointless, utterly pointless, but I shoved a heavy chest of drawers against it anyway, wedging it as tightly as I could in the narrow space. The splintering at the front door continued, a brutal, relentless assault. And now, I heard another sound, weaving in with the cracking wood. A low, mournful humming, resonating through the stone walls, vibrating in the very air of the cottage. H-m. The sound of the humming grew louder, deeper, more resonant, filling the small cottage, pressing in on my ears, vibrating in my skull. It was inside the cottage now, I realized with a fresh wave of terror. It was inside the walls themselves, somehow, humming, waiting. The ripping, splintering sound at the front door abruptly stopped. Silence again. But this silence was different. This silence was heavy, expectant, suffocating. The silence before whatever came next. And then, slowly, deliberately, the bedroom door began to creak inwards. The chest of drawers scraping uselessly across the stone floor. The humming intensified, resonating through the wood, through the stone, through my very bones. And through the widening crack in the bedroom door, in the swirling mist-gray light from the moor outside, I saw it. Before I could react, his hand reached for the ornate winding key. Panic flared in my chest. No! I blurted out, lunging forward and grabbing his arm. My fingers clamped down on his wrist, stopping him just inches from the key. Don't, I said, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. Please. Just trust me on this. I'm not ready for anyone to wind it yet. I knew it sounded insane, but I couldn't explain the sudden, overwhelming dread that had washed over me. Liam blinked, surprised. Okay, he said slowly, pulling his hand back. Weird, but okay. Dinner then? He gave me a slightly confused, slightly amused look. I forced a smile, leaned in, and kissed him. He smelled good, like expensive cologne and something warm and comforting. After the kiss, the tension eased a little. Yeah, dinner, I said, grabbing my purse. Let's go. I didn't realize until we were already out the door that he'd already turned the winding key, just a fraction of an inch. Barely enough to notice. But enough, I would soon learn, to set something in motion. The rest of the evening is a blur, a hazy montage of fancy food and red wine. We went to the old pink house, a Savannah institution. I remember the flickering candlelight, the hushed murmur of conversations, the clinking of silverware. We had courses, so many courses. Oysters Rockefeller, she crab soup, shrimp and grits, Savannah classics. I drank more wine than intended, at least 3 glasses of a rich Cabernet Sauvignon. The couple next to us, tourists from up north, were loudly debating the merits of different retirement portfolios. I vaguely recall ordering a rum milkshake for dessert, topped with a ridiculous amount of whipped cream and banana slices. There was a live pianist in the corner, tinkling out jazz standards. At one point, he launched into a surprisingly good rendition of Sweet Child O' Mine. Liam, bless him, didn't mention the clock, didn't push about winding it. He was charming, attentive, and completely oblivious to the growing unease churning in my gut. I felt like I was floating just above reality, watching myself go through the motions of a perfect date while some darker current pulled me under. The bill, the departure, the ride home, it's all fragmented, dreamlike. Cab or car? His place or mine? Did we even? I draw a blank. Complete and utter blackout. I woke up in my own bed, sunlight stabbing through the blinds. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache behind my eyes. Nausea rolled in waves. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, dragged through a swamp, and then left for dead. The missing hours, the gaping hole in my memory, that's what truly freaked me out. It wasn't just a hangover, it was something else, something wrong. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen. No new texts. Just the usual barrage of notifications. Then I noticed it, the grandfather clock. It looked different. Darker somehow, more imposing in the morning light. And was that dust? No, not dust. It looked like fine, dark powder coating the top of the clock. It hadn't been there before. I sat up, the room spinning. I almost passed out again, a wave of dizziness washing over me. I switched on the bedside lamp, the sudden brightness making my headache pound harder. And then I saw it. Not just the clock, but the room. It was changed. Subtly, disturbingly altered. The air felt heavy, thick with a cloying, sweet scent I couldn't quite place. And the shadows, they seemed deeper, sharper, clinging to the corners of the room like living things. I focused back on the clock. It seemed to have shifted slightly, angled away from the wall. And was that a faint ticking sound? No, impossible. I hadn't wound it. Had I? My memory was still a scrambled mess. As I stared, a thin line of something dark and viscous oozed from the side of the clock, near the base. It wasn't dust. It was wet. And it smelled metallic. My breath hitched. Blood. It looked like dried blood. I lurched out of bed, my bare feet hitting the floor with a soft squish. The carpet felt damp, sticky. I looked down. More of the dark, viscous substance, spreading outwards from the base of the clock, staining the beige carpet a gruesome crimson. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. I stumbled towards the clock, my heart hammering against my ribs. The ticking sound was clearer now, a slow, deliberate pulse, like a heartbeat. And the clock face, it wasn't blank anymore. Faint lines had appeared, ghostly numerals forming in the darkness. I reached out a trembling hand, drawn in despite myself. I had to see. I had to know. I had to stop the ticking. My fingers brushed against the cold, dark wood. And then the clock chimed. Not a gentle chime, but a deep, resonant gong that vibrated through the floorboards, through my bones. And as the sound faded, the clock face sprang to life, the ghostly numerals glowing with an eerie, green light. The hands began to move, slowly, deliberately, counting down. Not time. Something else. Something darker. And from inside the clock, from the depths of its ancient mechanism, I heard a faint whisper. A voice, cold and dry as dust, speaking my name. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a clock. This was something else entirely. And I had just woken it up. My name, whispered from inside the clock. It was impossible, insane, but I heard it, clear as a bell, echoing in the sudden silence after the chime. My name, spoken with a chilling familiarity, like a long-lost friend or a predator recognizing its prey. Terror, raw and primal, seized me. I stumbled back, tripping over the crimson stain on the carpet, scrambling away from the clock like it was a venomous snake ready to strike. My phone. I needed my phone. To call Liam, to call someone. Anyone. I spotted it lying near the base of the clock, half submerged in the viscous fluid. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cold, sticky mass. When I pulled it free, the screen flickered erratically, lines of static dancing across the glass. Scrambled. Useless. Trapped. I was trapped in my own apartment with this thing. This clock. This portal. Whatever it wasn't just an antique anymore. It was alive. And it knew my name. The ticking intensified, faster now, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. The green numerals on the clock face pulsed, counting down, but counting down to what? Doom? Destruction? Me? I had to get out. Run. Escape. But where could I go? And would it even matter? If this thing was paranormal, could I outrun it? My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route, a weapon, anything. The windows? Too high, and I was on the second floor. The door? My only way out, but to where? And what if it followed? Then I saw them. On the walls. Symbols. Not just random scribbles, but deliberate, intricate symbols, drawn in the same crimson fluid that was oozing from the clock. Occult symbols. I recognized them from my research. Pentagrams, sigils, strange geometric shapes that pulsed with a faint, unsettling energy. They hadn't been there last night. They'd appeared while I was blacked out. While it was here. And then the scent hit me again, stronger now, overpowering the metallic tang of blood. Cloyingly sweet, like rotting lilies. Funerals. Death. The smell of a grave. The air grew colder, a bone-chilling cold that seeped into my skin, making my teeth chatter. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, swirling and coalescing into shapes. Humanoid shapes. Twisted, elongated, barely formed, but undeniably there. Whispering. Murmuring. Closing in. I screamed. A raw, desperate sound that tore through the oppressive silence of the room. And as I screamed, the clock chimed again. Gone. Louder this time, deeper, resonating in my chest, stealing my breath. The green numerals flickered, then vanished. The ticking stopped. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, pressing in, suffocating. The shadows solidified, becoming more defined, more real. And from the clock itself, from the blank, dark face, something began to emerge. Slowly at first, then faster, writhing, twisting, pushing its way out of the wood. Tendrils of darkness, coiling and uncoiling, like smoke given form, like nightmares made flesh. I didn't wait to see what else would emerge. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted for the door, stumbling over the sticky carpet, slamming my shoulder against the frame as I wrenched it open. I didn't look back. I didn't grab my purse, my keys, anything. Just ran. Out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the humid Savannah night. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. Just away. Away from the clock. Away from the whispers. Away from the darkness that had taken root in my apartment. Eventually, I found myself at my next-door neighbor's door, Mrs. Henderson, the sweet old lady who always baked cookies and complained about the squirrels in her garden. I pounded on her door, frantic, desperate. She opened it, peering at me through her chain-link peephole. Then she gasped, her eyes widening in alarm. I must have been a sight, bloodstains on my dress, tears and mascara streaming down my face, hair a tangled mess. Mrs. Henderson, please. Call the police. Please, you have to help me. I choked out, my voice hoarse with terror. Something happened in my apartment. It's the clock. She stared at me for a long moment, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Then, slowly, she unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. Come in, dear, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Come in and tell me everything. And I did. I told her everything. About the clock, the cellar, the symbols, the blood, the whispers, the shadows, the thing that was emerging from the clock. I poured it all out, a torrent of fear and disbelief, expecting her to call me crazy, to slam the door in my face. But she didn't. She listened, her brow furrowed, her eyes never leaving mine. And when I was finished, when I sat there, shaking and sobbing, she didn't dismiss me. She didn't laugh. She just nodded slowly, her face grim. Savannah's an old city, dear, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Old things sometimes hold on to things. Things you can't see, things you can't explain. I've lived here long enough to know that some stories are best left untold. Then she took my trembling hand in her own, her grip surprisingly strong, and led me to her phone. Let's call them, she said, her voice firm now. Let's call the police. And then we'll figure out what to do about that clock. And as the sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer, I knew one thing for sure. My morbid hobby, my fascination with the darker side of things, had finally caught up with me. And this time, it wasn't just a painting on the wall or a dusty artifact in a box. This time, It was real. And it was coming for me. It's insane how something as hidden as the dark web can hold some of the most messed up stuff on Earth. I only ever used it to learn coding and mess around with petty cyber stuff, but after what I just saw, I'm done with it for good. My friend, Liam, got me into the dark web in the first place. It was a bit after my folks moved us to this new town, Crestwood. Back in our old place, there were a bunch of murders, and my parents freaked and moved us across the state. I thought it was a bit much, but whatever. Liam and I clicked fast because we were both internet junkies. I was all about gaming and Twitch, while he was deep into coding and tech stuff. 2 years later, we were still tight. Then Liam found the dark web and got obsessed. He was on it all the time, digging through who knows what. It wasn't really a problem, until one day he searched for something that messed him up big time. I woke up to a ton of texts from him one morning. That was weird. Liam wasn't really a texter. I checked my phone and saw a bunch of urgent messages. Dude, Mark, you gotta come over now. Seriously important. Mark, wake up. This is an emergency. Where are you? And a bunch more like that, all urgent, telling me to get to his house ASAP. My parents were already at work, so I headed over to Liam's place. When I got there were like 4 cop cars outside his house, and a bunch of people and news vans standing around. I pushed through the crowd, and Liam's mom saw me and told the cops to let me through. She was crying, tears running down her face as she opened the door. "What's going on, Mrs. Davis?" I asked, totally confused. "Liam's gone," she choked out, starting to sob. My stomach dropped. Gone? How could that happen? He just texted me like an hour ago. Then it hit me. What if he was trying to warn me? What if his texts were about why he disappeared? Still in shock, I walked over to one of the detectives in the kitchen. "Is Liam going to be okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course he is," the detective said, but something in his voice sounded off. "We're going to find him real soon." Something about that answer felt wrong. Like, deep down, I knew he was lying. I pulled out my phone to show him Liam's texts. "He texted me this morning," I said. "What if this is connected to him missing?" He read through the messages, and his face changed. He told me they needed to keep my phone to check the texts and that they'd give it back later. I hung around Liam's house for a while, just because I didn't know what else to do. His parents were a mess, and it hurt to see them like that. Eventually, I went into Liam's room to see if I could find anything at all that could explain why he disappeared. I searched everywhere, drawers, closet, everything, but found nothing. Then I noticed his computer was on, but the monitor was off. I found the power button and hit it. As the screen lit up, my blood ran cold. He was on the dark web. Okay, that was normal for him, but he had a ton of tabs open. That wasn't normal. I closed the door, locked it, and started going through them. At first, it was all the usual dark web stuff, but then it got seriously creepy. One tab was an article about a murder from years ago. A woman found dead in her apartment, body messed up, cut apart, covered in acid. I almost threw up just reading it, let alone seeing the crime scene photos. I clicked to the next tab, just wanting to get away from that, and it was another murder article. Confused and sick to my stomach, I went through the rest of the tabs. All the same thing. Every single one was about some murder or horrific crime. But one article stood out. It was about a murder that happened 2 years ago. At first, it seemed random, but as I read on, I realized what it was. It was about our old neighbor back in our old town, the murder that made my parents freak out and move us. I was totally confused. How did Liam know about this? I never told him about it. It wasn't a big deal to me. It had to be a weird coincidence, right? But then I saw the last search he'd made on his computer. It was my last name. Freaked out and confused, I stumbled out of his room and back to the living room. "Is everything all right, Mark?" Liam's mom asked, still sniffling. "Yeah, just gotta head home for dinner," I mumbled. Walking home, my head was spinning. Why was he searching my last name? Did he think I had something to do with this? Was that why he texted me so urgently? If only I could explain to him I had nothing to do with any of this, but I couldn't. He was still missing, and I had to figure out why. Back home, I ran to my room, slammed the door, and jumped on my computer. I fired up Tor browser and turned on my VPN. I knew what I had to do. I started typing in my last name, getting more nervous with every letter. When I finally hit enter, nothing happened. Just a blank page. Confused, I refreshed, but still nothing. Why would Liam search this if there was nothing there? I was about to close the tab, thinking it was a dead end, when suddenly the page started to load. It took forever, but finally it loaded. And it was videos. Hundreds of them. I knew instantly what they were. Murders. But why did they show up when you searched my last name? I almost stopped right there, knowing what kind of sick stuff I was about to see, but I couldn't. This had to be why Liam went missing. I clicked on the first video. It started playing, and I saw a woman strapped to a chair in some kind of basement. I instantly recognized her. It was our old neighbor from back home. She had this heart-shaped tattoo on her neck. I remembered it clear as day. She was struggling, panicking, screaming for help. Then, two figures walked into frame. At first, I couldn't see who they were, but as they turned to face the camera, my heart stopped. It was my parents. My dad was holding a knife, and my mom had a small scalpel. They paused for a second, then they started the most horrifying 5 minutes of my life. I watched as they cut her apart, listened to her begging for mercy, screaming the whole time. Blood everywhere as she took her last breath. When the video ended, it jumped to another one, same room, same chair. I was already traumatized. I knew I couldn't watch anymore. My parents were murderers. That was the real reason we moved. I knew something was off about that move, but I never imagined this. I thought Liam was accusing me, but he was trying to warn me. I scrolled through more videos, all in the same room. I was about to close the browser, ready to go to the police, when I saw it. A new video. Uploaded today. I clicked it and hit play. This time, it was a man strapped to the chair. Sack over his head, couldn't see who it was. Then, my parents walked into frame. My dad walked up to the man and pulled the sack off his head. At first, I didn't recognize him. Then it hit me. It was Liam, strapped to that chair. My blood turned to ice. It was him, no doubt. His messy brown hair, that little scar above his eyebrow from when he fell out of a tree when we were kids. It was Liam. And my parents were there, standing over him, just like in the other videos. My mind was racing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of sick joke, a nightmare. But the video kept playing, and it was all too real. Liam was struggling against the straps, his eyes wide with terror. He was trying to say something through the gag in his mouth, but it was muffled, desperate. My dad, his face cold and blank, held up a nasty-looking pair of pliers. My mom, she was just watching, her eyes. I don't even know how to describe them. Empty, maybe? Like she was watching TV, not about to do something completely monstrous. Then, my dad spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "You've been asking too many questions, Liam," he said, like he was scolding a kid for not doing his homework. "Curiosity," he went on, "well, you know how that ends." Liam just kept struggling, shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. He knew. He knew what was coming. And so did I. I wanted to scream, to reach through the screen and pull him out of there, but I was frozen, paralyzed by what I was seeing. My dad nodded to my mom, and she stepped forward, holding something in her hand. It was a syringe. Liam's eyes went even whiter as he saw it. He started thrashing harder, making these choked sounds. My mom calmly rolled up his sleeve, found a vein in his arm, and stuck the needle in. Liam went still almost instantly. His body went limp, his head lolled to the side. My mom pulled the needle out, tossed it onto a metal tray next to the chair. Then, she stepped back, and my dad raised the pliers. I couldn't watch. I slammed my laptop shut, like that could somehow stop what was happening, like I could unsee what I'd already seen. I stumbled back from my desk, knocking over my chair, and just stood there in the middle of my room, breathing hard, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. Murderers. My parents were murderers. They had killed that neighbor lady years ago, and now they had Liam. And they were going to do the same thing to him. The video was proof. Liam, searching my last name, finding those videos, he must have figured it out. He must have gotten too close, and they took him. But why? Why were they doing this? Why were there videos? Why my last name? It made no sense. Except for one thing. The move. We moved after that neighbor was killed. My parents said it was because of the murders in town, but that was a lie. They moved because they were the murderers. They were running away, trying to escape what they'd done. And now, they were doing it again. Here, in Crestwood. They hadn't stopped. They just moved their operation. And Liam had stumbled into it. I had to do something. I had to go to the police. But my parents, could I really turn them in? These were the people who raised me, who took care of me, who I thought I knew. But did I really know them at all? Were they even human? And then there was Liam. He was still alive when the video started. Maybe if I acted fast enough, maybe I could still save him. Hope, a tiny spark, flickered in my chest. I had to try. I had to try for Liam. I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I needed to call the police. But then I hesitated. What if they didn't believe me? Hey, cops, my parents are serial killers, and I saw it on the dark web. Yeah, that would go over great. They'd think I was crazy. Or worse, they'd alert my parents. No, I needed proof. I needed to download those videos. They were on the dark web, yeah, but there had to be a way to get them. If I could get those videos, then the police would have to believe me. It was risky, going back on the dark web, especially now, knowing what my parents were capable of. But I had to. For Liam. I opened my laptop again, my fingers trembling as I typed in the Tor browser address. My heart was pounding in my ears. Every shadow in my room seemed to be moving. I found the website again, the one with the videos. My last name, still chillingly displayed at the top of the page. I clicked on the video of Liam again, the one that was still marked new. This time, I didn't watch it. I looked for a download button, anything that would let me save the video. There was nothing obvious, just a video player and a bunch of creepy comments below it. But maybe if I right-clicked. I moved my mouse over the video and right-clicked. A menu popped up. Save video as, yes. There it was. My hands were shaking so badly I almost missed it. I clicked Save Video As, and chose a folder on my desktop. The download started, a slow crawl across the screen. Come on, I urged it silently. Download faster. Liam didn't have time to wait. While it was downloading, I scrolled through the other videos, the older ones. I had to get them too. Every single one of them. This was evidence. This was how I could prove what my parents were. I started downloading them one by one, each one a sickening reminder of what they had done, what they were still doing. It took forever. Each video was huge. The download speeds on the dark web were glacial. But finally, slowly, they all downloaded. Every single horrifying video, saved onto my computer. Proof. I had proof. Now what? Call the police. Yes, that was the plan. But I was still terrified. Terrified of my parents, terrified of what they might do if they found out I knew. Terrified that it might already be too late for Liam. But I had to try. I had to call. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone again, and this time I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911. My voice was shaky as I spoke, trying to explain everything. The dark web, the videos, my parents, Liam. It all sounded insane, even to my own ears. The dispatcher on the other end of the line sounded skeptical, to say the least. But I kept talking, kept telling her what I'd seen, begging her to believe me. Finally, she said she'd send someone over. "Stay where you are, sir," she said. "And do not approach your parents. Do not approach my parents." That hit me hard. My parents. Were they still my parents? Or were they just monsters, I hung up the phone and looked around my room. It felt different now, tainted somehow. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. My parents could walk in here any minute. What would I say to them? What would they say to me? Could they even look me in the eye after what they'd done? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Just then, I heard the front door open downstairs. My parents were home, and I was alone upstairs with the evidence of their unspeakable crimes, waiting for the police to arrive, and praying that it wasn't too late for Liam. My heart hammered against my ribs as I heard them downstairs. Footsteps, keys jingling, the familiar sound of the door closing. They were home. And the police weren't here yet. Not yet. Panic clawed at my throat. I had to hide the laptop. No, better yet, I needed to get out of the house. But where could I go? And what about the videos? I couldn't just leave them here. They were the only proof. Think, Mark, think. My eyes darted around the room, landing on my backpack in the corner. Yes. I could put the laptop in there, pretend I was just heading out to walk the dog or something. Anything to get out of the house before they came upstairs. I snatched up the laptop, shoved it into my backpack, and slung it over my shoulder. My hands were still shaking so badly I could barely grip the zipper. Just as I finished, I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up. Mark, you home? It was my mom's voice, sounding normal every day. Like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just done what I saw in those videos. It was sickening. Yeah, Mom, just about to head out. I called back, trying to sound casual, like my voice wasn't trembling. I moved towards the door, my backpack feeling heavy, like it weighed a ton. The footsteps got closer, and then my dad appeared in the doorway. He looked at me, a slight frown on his face. Heading out? Where to? Just for a walk, I stammered, avoiding his eyes. Needed some air. He narrowed his eyes a little, studying me. You okay? You look pale. Yeah, fine, I lied, trying to push past him. Just a bit tired. He didn't move, blocking the doorway. Tired? You've been in your room all evening. What have you been doing? My heart was going to explode. He was so close, so normal looking, but I knew what he was. What they both were. Monsters in disguise. Just homework, I mumbled, still not meeting his gaze. Homework? On the dark web? My mom's voice. She was right behind him now, also blocking the doorway. How long had they been listening? How much did they know? My blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow, they knew. What are you talking about? I said, my voice barely a whisper. My dad's frown deepened. He reached out, his hand sneaking out and grabbing my arm. His grip was like iron. Don't play games with us, Mark. We know you've been on Liam's computer. We know what you've seen. My breath hitched. There was no point in denying it now. They knew. And they weren't going to let me leave. You killed him, didn't you? I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You killed Liam. My mom stepped forward, her face still eerily calm. Liam made a mistake, Mark. He got into things he shouldn't have. Things he didn't understand. Understand? I yelled, finally meeting their eyes, tears welling up. He understood enough to know you were murderers. He saw the videos. I saw them too. A flicker of something crossed my dad's face. Was it regret? No, couldn't be. It was probably just annoyance. The videos are necessary, Mark. For control. Control? You call torturing and murdering people control? I was shaking now, anger and fear warring inside me. You're sick. You're both sick. My mom sighed, like I was being unreasonable. We do what we have to do, Mark. To protect ourselves. To protect you. Protect me? By killing people? By making me watch those things? The Russian word for horrible slipped out, a word my dad used sometimes when he was really angry. It felt fitting now. My dad's grip tightened on my arm. You don't understand, Mark. This is family business. It's in our blood. No! I screamed, trying to pull away. It's not in my blood. I'm not like you. I'm going to the police. That was the wrong thing to say. My dad's eyes hardened. He nodded to my mom, and she moved behind me, quick as a snake. Before I could react, she had grabbed my other arm, and they were both dragging me back into my room. No! Let me go! I struggled, kicking and twisting, but they were too strong. Years of whatever they did, it had made them strong, cold, efficient. I was just a kid. They shoved me back into my room, onto my bed. My dad slammed the door shut and locked it. My mom stood over me, her face still unnervingly calm. My dad loomed in the doorway, his eyes like ice. You're going to stay here, Mark, my mom said, her voice flat. You need to calm down. We need to talk. Talk? What's there to talk about? I know what you are. I was spitting the words out now, tears streaming down my face. You're monsters. My dad stepped closer, his face inches from mine. We are your parents, Mark. And you will respect us. His voice was low, dangerous. You will understand. Eventually. Then, he did something that made my blood run even colder. He smiled. A slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. After all, he said, his voice almost a purr, family sticks together. Doesn't it? And then, they left. They walked out of the room, leaving me locked inside, alone with my terror, and the horrifying truth about my family. I could hear them downstairs, moving around, talking in low voices. Were they planning what to do with me? Were they going to? No. I couldn't think about that. I had to escape. The police were coming, they had to be. But what if they didn't get here in time? What if my parents? I scrambled off the bed, my mind racing. The window. My room was on the second floor. It was a long drop, but it was better than staying here. I ran to the window, fumbled with the latch, and threw it open. Fresh night air rushed in, a small comfort in the suffocating fear that filled the room. I looked down. Too far to jump, I'd break a leg for sure. But maybe I could climb down. There was a trellis right below the window. Maybe I could use that. I leaned out the window, peering down at the trellis. It looked flimsy, but it was something. It was my only chance. Taking a deep breath, I swung my leg out the window, then the other, and started to climb. The trellis creaked and swayed beneath my weight, and loose pebbles from the wall rained down around me. It was terrifying, clinging to the flimsy wood, the ground so far below. But I kept going, inching my way down, my heart pounding with every creak and groan of the trellis. Finally, my feet touched the ground. I stumbled, almost fell, but caught myself. I was out. I was free. For now. I didn't look back at the house. I just ran. Ran as fast as I could, away from the monsters who were my parents, away from the house of horrors, towards what? I didn't know. But anywhere was better than staying there. As I ran, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling as I looked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. Looking for Liam Davis, it read. We have him. Come alone to the old Crestwood Mill if you want to see him alive again. And don't even think about calling the police. We're watching you, Mark. My blood ran cold. They had Liam. And now they had me too. They knew I'd call the police. They were always one step ahead. Always in control. But Liam, he was still alive. Maybe. And they wanted to trade me for Liam. It was a trap. I knew it was. But what choice did I have? I couldn't leave Liam to them. I had to try. Even if it meant walking right into the lion's den. The old Crestwood Mill. I knew the place. Abandoned, falling apart, on the edge of town. Perfect for what my parents did. Perfect for a trap. But I was going. For Liam. Even if it was the last thing I ever did. I started running again, this time towards the old mill, towards the darkness, towards the unknown horror that awaited me there. And as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just running towards my friend, but towards my own doom. It's weird, right? How one little question can stick with you for years, like a splinter you can't quite dig out. This one question has been under my skin ever since college. Back then, I was super into anything paranormal. Cheesy ghost hunting shows? Count me in. Creepy podcasts? All over it. My boyfriend at the time, Mark, was a total skeptic, eye-rolling at everything. So, when our student activity council brought in this famous ghost hunter to speak on campus, I ditched Mark in his dorm and practically sprinted to the auditorium. Honestly, I hadn't heard of this guy before. His name was Dr. Alistair Blackwood. But the intro they gave him was impressive, years in the field, books published, maybe even a TV thing in the works. This was back in 2005, so who knows? He walked out on stage, This kind of small dude with a neat little white beard, like a professor, and thinning hair. But man, when he started talking about ghosts, about the afterlife, it was captivating. You could feel he genuinely believed every word, or he was the best con artist I'd ever seen. Everyone in that auditorium was hanging on his every syllable. He showed us clips from his investigations. Grainy night vision footage, weird noises, the usual stuff. He had photos too, and stories to go with them. I remember one about a haunted antique doll. He claimed it would move around this woman's living room when no one was looking. She bought it at some flea market and suddenly things started going bump in the night. Of course, nobody ever actually saw it move, but Dr. Blackwood swore it was possessed. Classic ghost hunter stuff, but he told it with such conviction. Then came the Q&A. Predictably, there were the dumb college kid questions. Dude, have you ever seen a head spin around like in The Exorcist? Seriously? But there were also some genuinely interesting questions mixed in. I figured this was my shot. When else would I get to talk to someone who was supposedly a big deal in the ghost world? So, I raised my hand. Dr. Blackwood scanned the room, then pointed right at me, smiling. Yes, you, in the blue sweater? Ah, hi, I said, and I cringed internally because I sounded so nervous. I felt instantly stupid for being nervous. I was just wondering, what's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? In your career, I mean, as a ghost hunter? I was sitting pretty far back in the auditorium, maybe halfway to the exit, but I swear I saw his smile falter. Just for a second, but it was there. His face seemed to deflate. Well, he started, forcing this tight, little laugh, and yeah, it was totally forced. There are so many scary moments to choose from, you know? It kind of comes with the territory in my line of work. A few people in the audience chuckled. I immediately felt like an idiot for even asking. He went on to tell this story about tracking a poltergeist in an old hospital. Something about his EMF meter going crazy and a door slamming shut. He made it sound spooky, but honestly, for a guy who chases ghosts for a living, it seemed pretty tame. Like flashlight batteries dying in a scary place scary. He wrapped up that story, answered a couple more questions, but he didn't look my way again. When the talk ended and everyone started shuffling out, I didn't want to get stuck in the crowd at the main doors. Feeling a little bummed, like I'd somehow messed up, I slipped out the side exit and headed back towards my dorm. And that's when I saw him. Dr. Blackwood was sitting on a bench near the bike racks, smoking a cigarette. I ducked my head, hoping to just walk past without him noticing. Hey, kid. He took a drag, then stubbed the cigarette out on the concrete bench beside him. Listen, I'm sorry, I blurted out, feeling like a total dork. I know my question was dumb. I wasn't trying to make fun of you or anything. He just shook his head, brushed some ash off the bench, then patted the space next to him, like inviting me to sit. I hesitated. Stranger danger, right? All those campus safety talks flashed through my head. But he was older, I was young. I could probably outrun him if things got weird. Or maybe I was just as dumb as I felt. I sat down, leaving a good foot of space between us. He looked tired, older up close. The stage persona, the confident salesman vibe, was gone. Just a man in his 60s with lines around his eyes that told stories. I didn't tell the truth, Dr. Blackwood said, his voice quiet. That story about the hospital, it wasn't the scariest moment of my career. I know, I remember saying, and it wasn't even a question. He just nodded, like he'd known I'd see right through it. This is the scariest moment of my career, he said, and then he started to tell me his story. It was back in the 70s, he began, his voice getting that faraway tone people get when they're dredging up old memories. I was younger then, still trying to make a name for myself in the, paranormal industry. Sounds ridiculous now, doesn't it? Industry. He chuckled humorlessly. Anyway, I was taking cases nobody else wanted. Usually, it was just some lonely old lady convinced her house was haunted, or some teenagers playing pranks. 9 times out of 10, it was a quick sage cleansing and I was on my way. Easy money. But then I got this call. From a family out in, well, it doesn't matter where. They were describing textbook demonic stuff. Physical disturbances, voices, the whole shebang. They said their teenage son was possessed. Possessed. I was ecstatic. This was it, I thought. The case that would make my career. The real deal. The only detail that gave me pause was the violence. They said their son, Michael, had become aggressive. Not just moody teenager stuff. They said he tried to hurt his cousin. His older female cousin. Tried to assault her. Dr. Blackwood's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. She wasn't badly hurt, thank God. But they sent her away to stay with relatives. They were terrified. So, I went out to their place. Fully prepared, as they say. He made air quotes with his fingers. Holy water, crucifixes, sage, the whole 9 yards. And I even packed a gun. He glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. A small handgun. Just in case. Stupid, I know. But the mother, her voice on the phone, it was frantic. It just felt prudent. I wish I could tell you the investigation was some wild, terrifying roller coaster. It wasn't. From the moment I pulled up to their house, this beautiful, old Victorian, all fixed up and fancy, everything just stopped. If it had ever been happening at all. 2 weeks. I spent 2 weeks in that house. Used all the cutting-edge tech of the time. EVP recorders, EMF meters, the works. Interviewed the son, Michael. He seemed withdrawn. Depressed. Definitely troubled, but possessed. I wasn't buying it. I recommended a therapist. A good one, a child psychologist. They took Michael into the city to see him on my last day. Parents went with him, came back late that night, exhausted. They went straight to bed, leaving me alone in the kitchen, supposed to be reviewing my findings. Findings. There were no findings. Everything they described, all the paranormal activity, it could all be explained away. Hysteria, stress, a kid with serious issues. Except for the drains. The house itself was amazing. They'd renovated it beautifully, kept all the old woodwork, the character. But the basement was different. Stone walls, damp, smelled like earth and mildew. They used it for storage, but not much. Too creepy, they said. And it was. Dark, windowless, just a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Cement floor. Spooky, sure. But my equipment? Nothing. No readings, no EVPs, nothing at all. Just cold. But the floor, the basement floor, it had these drains. Big ones. Slotted metal drains set right into the concrete. 4 of them. And it made no sense. This was a residential neighborhood, an old house, but not that old. Why would a house have industrial drains in the basement floor? So there I was, in the kitchen, late at night, surrounded by my evidence, which was nothing, trying to make sense of it all. Trying to justify my paycheck, basically. And then I heard it. Just a little sound at first. Like a scrape. I ignored it. Probably just the old house settling. But then it came again. Louder this time. Definitely coming from inside the house. There was a spiral staircase in the corner of the kitchen, leading up to the 2nd floor. That's where the sound was coming from. I figured it was the parents, maybe one of them couldn't sleep. I glanced up, towards the stairs. And then, it started coming down. Down the stairs. Not walking. Not floating, exactly. Just coming. Moving down the steps, towards me. Fast. It had no eyes. No face. Just this shape. Humanoid, maybe? But wrong. All wrong. And yet, somehow, I knew it was looking at me. Right at me. Staring into me. Into my soul. And then it spoke. I don't know how it spoke, Dr. Blackwood continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I actually heard anything. Maybe telepathy? I don't know. But I remember the words. Every syllable. Clear as day. You know what he did to us. That's what it said. Or communicated. And I didn't think. Couldn't think. Just pure animal panic. I ran. I knocked over my chair getting out of there. Papers went flying everywhere. My expert analysis about how the house wasn't haunted, just a troubled kid. I left them. Scattered on the kitchen floor. Do you understand how awful that is? I just left those people in that house with that thing. I didn't stop driving for 30 miles. 30 miles. When I finally realized how far I'd gone, I pulled over at a gas station, shaking like a leaf, and called them from a pay phone. The family. They were the furthest thing from my mind when I saw it. All I could think about was getting away. Running from that supposedly safe, normal house, like some scared dog with its tail between its legs. They moved, I think. I never followed up. Couldn't. Officially, I told them I found insufficient evidence of paranormal activity. Lies. It was cowardice. Pure and simple. I heard later, years later, that the house was torn down. Leveled. Good riddance, I thought. But the words stuck with me. You know what he did to us. They burrowed into my brain. Curiosity, guilt, I don't know what it was, but it ate at me. Little rat teeth, gnawing away. And eventually, I started digging. Old newspapers. Microfiche at the library. Local archives. Nothing jumped out at first. No big headlines screaming mortician's house haunted. But little things. Obituaries. Property records. I started piecing things together. Turn of the century, the house was built by a mortician. Right there in that neighborhood. He couldn't find a commercial space he liked, he said. So he built his business right into his home. Grand Victorian on the outside, funeral home in the middle, mortuary in the basement. A real entrepreneur, they called him back then. Living the American dream. Upstairs, the bedrooms. Main floor, the viewing rooms, embalming prep. Basement, the basement was the cold room. The other work. His voice cracked. And then it hit me. The drains. In the basement floor. For blood. For fluids. For God knows what else. Decades later, another story. Another local pillar of the community. Arrested. Abuse of professional position, the papers said. Moral turpitude. Vague, hushed up. Small town scandal. He got off light. Brief jail stint. Then he just vanished. Stripped his house bare, left town before the trial even started. Never seen again. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Mortician's house. Trains in the basement. Abuse of professional position. I don't know for sure. But those words. You know what he did to us. It all clicked into place. Why a mortician would need to build his business into his house. Why he needed that basement. Why those trains. The things that happened to those bodies in that basement, unspeakable. But, yes. I know now. I know what he did to them. And that's why, Dr. Blackwood said, his voice trembling, that encounter with that faceless thing, that's the scariest moment of my career. Not because of the ghost, but because of what it made me realize. The true darkness inside people. I remember his face then. All the color drained out of it. His white beard seemed to blend right into his pale skin. His shoulders slumped. His voice shook. I mumbled an apology. He just waved a hand, like it didn't matter. Then he stood up and walked away. I felt awful. Still do, sometimes, for making him relive that. But life moved on. College faded into bills, careers, grown-up stuff. Dr. Blackwood and his ghost story became a weird memory. A good story to tell at parties, maybe. Until last week. When my fiancé, Ben, and I moved in together. Into this old fixer-upper. He warned me about the basement. Spiders, mold, the usual. But I'm stubborn. I wanted to unpack my books, get organized. So, I started hauling boxes downstairs. And that's when I saw it. Right in the center of the basement floor. Big. Slotted. Metal. A train. And now I'm lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of this old house. So worried. So scared. Of what I might. No. We don't sleep. I'm Detective Evelyn Reed, and what you're about to read are my recollections from the strangest case I've ever been entangled in, the disappearances of Silent Hollow. As a detective, true crime has always held a morbid fascination for me. Disappearances, unsolved murders, cold cases, they all ignite that part of my brain that relentlessly seeks answers. But if there's one case that has consistently haunted my thoughts, it's the enigma of Silent Hollow. By all accounts, Silent Hollow was once your typical, quiet town. Crime was minimal, and its main attraction was the expansive silent creek that snaked through the region. For years, Silent Hollow was a desirable and peaceful place to settle down, with homes built along the creek's edge, offering stunning views of the lively water and dense forests. But that tranquility was destined to be shattered. The Blackwood family constructed their opulent mansion on the waterfront, acquiring vast acres of land back in the 60s. They resided in their Victorian-style mansion for a solid 5 years, until their youngest daughter, Iris, vanished without a trace. She was last seen swimming in the creek with her sister near their private dock. Her sister, Hazel, recounted that Iris was enjoying herself in the water, then glanced towards the dock, and her smile abruptly vanished. Hazel blinked, and in that instant, Iris seemed to cease to exist. The Blackwood children, Hazel and her 2 older brothers, Finn and Jasper, were said to have descended into madness in the year following Iris's sudden disappearance, so much so that Elias and Clara Blackwood were compelled to isolate their remaining children from the outside world. Eyewitness accounts claim Hazel was seen fleeing into the adjacent woods in 1967, never to return to the Blackwood household. 2 years later, Clara Blackwood succumbed to a mysterious illness, and Elias Blackwood lived in solitude until his death in 1971. Following his demise, there has been no sign of Finn or Jasper Blackwood. Vanished, as if they were never even real. For years, the Blackwood mansion stood sentinel over Silent Creek, and that mansion seems to be the ominous harbinger of the region's unsettling occurrences. My first assignment as a detective was in '97, hired by the mother of Leo Maxwell. I still recall the strangeness of my inaugural case being a missing child report. Shouldn't it have been assigned to someone with more experience? Yet, I accepted the case with diligence and haste. I was optimistic and drove down to Leo's mother, Martha. However, as soon as I entered Silent Hollow, the reason for my assignment became chillingly clear. The town was plastered with missing child posters. It was just another unwanted case from this forsaken place. It was practically a ghost town. Buildings, businesses, and houses stood, but hardly a soul was in sight. I drove down the road to Martha Maxwell's house, a desolate street ripped straight from a horror film. The sky was a deep navy blue as the sun dipped behind the distant trees, dense forests enveloping both sides of the road, and a solitary, sputtering streetlight cast a flickering, bluish glow on the low-hanging fog. The streetlight pole was layered with desperate pleas for help in finding some distraught parent's children. I pulled into Martha's driveway and stepped out of my vehicle. The air was thick with the scent of damp leaves, and as eerily still as a predator lying in wait. I knocked on Martha's door, the sound echoing into the silence. As I waited, I surveyed the surroundings. My gaze was drawn to one thing in particular. Atop the hillside, looming over everything and seemingly illuminated by the emerging moon, stood the Blackwood mansion. Its twisted, jagged silhouette pierced the moonlight. Even then, I could sense the malevolence emanating from the house, its presence oppressive and foreboding. Shortly after my knock, Martha creaked open her door and ushered me inside. She was a frail, middle-aged woman with a voice raspy from years of smoking. "Just in here," she croaked, guiding me to Leo's room. "I need you to explain this to me." Inside his bedroom, she shivered in her robe and hair curlers. He screamed. God, he screamed for me. But when I rushed in here, she shoved Leo's bed away from the wall, revealing claw marks gouged into the hardwood floor beneath. They started at the foot of the bed and ended at the corner of the wall. Gone, just gone. Where did he go? She sobbed, a tear tracing a path through her powdered cheek. The case of Leo Maxwell was my initial impetus to delve deeper into Silent Hollow. How could a child simply vanish into thin air from the supposed safety of his own home? Fortunately, my superiors concurred and entrusted me with all the missing child reports from Silent Hollow. Case after case, I interviewed distraught mothers and fathers who recounted their children inexplicably vanishing without a trace. Clara Bellwether was the next major case that consumed me. Her family had relocated to Silent Hollow in '98, settling just down the street from the Blackwood mansion. Clara was a typical 15-year-old girl. She adored her family, had a circle of friends at her small school, and excelled in her classes. But inexplicably, she developed a form of epilepsy midway through her first semester. She began experiencing what doctors described as unpredictable full-body seizures, which they attributed to the sudden onset of unusual schizophrenia. Clara would abruptly succumb to violent spasms and, in their aftermath, claimed that the thing in the walls was trying to carry her away. Doctors prescribed antipsychotics for her hallucinations. Clara endured weeks of torment, and her parents spiraled into mental degradation alongside her. Child Protective Services and the police were summoned to a horrific scene on November 2, 1998. Upon entering the house, they discovered Clara's parents attempting to cook her alive in the oven, hysterically claiming that the devil demanded their daughter, so they sought to send her to God before the devil could claim her. Needless to say, they were arrested for attempted first-degree murder, and Clara was admitted to an institution for troubled children. This institution is where I enter the narrative once more, because a mere week after her admittance, she escaped into the Silent Hollow woods. We spent weeks combing those woods, but she was never found. She became another child swallowed by thin air. The events of that case continue to haunt me. The first piece of evidence I feel compelled to discuss is the tape, a recording of Clara's first and only therapy session at the institution. I'll transcribe the conversation to the best of my recollection. Dr. Alloway, so, where do you feel comfortable starting? Clara, here, when I moved here. Dr. Holloway, what about here? Was the move particularly stressful? I can imagine it might have been. Clara, yeah, but that wasn't the problem. Dr. Holloway, then what is, Clara? Was it issues with kids at school or your pardash? Clara, it is the problem. Dr. Holloway. Clara, God, you can't see it either. I'm going crazy here. It's been here the whole time. Dr. Holloway, Clara, you need to cooperate with me. or we won't make any progress. Are you experiencing hallucinations again? Like seeing things that aren't there? Clara, you can call it a hallucination. You can call it whatever you want, like my other doctors, but that won't change the fact that it's in here, with us. Dr. Holloway, you need to take your medication, Clara. It's designed to alleviate your symptoms. Clara, you are not listening to me. At this point in the tape, Clara is audibly distressed. She's sobbing into her hands, seemingly defeated. Her psychiatrist clicks her pen and sighs. Dr. Holloway, okay. Let's discuss this then. If you're taking your medication, and this isn't a hallucination, reason with me. Talking it through will help us both understand what you're dealing with. I genuinely want to help you, Clara. I apologize for not believing you initially. Tell me everything. Clara. I saw it. I saw it a few days after we moved in. In the woods, by the creek. Dr. Holloway, it's okay to cry, Clara. Don't hold back. Clara, I didn't pay it much attention at first. I thought it was just one of the neighbors from the mansion. But I learned no one lived there, and I kept seeing it for weeks. It watched me from the woods. And then it called my name. Dr. Holloway. The Blackwood Mansion, right? Clara, it knew my name. I couldn't sleep. It was always watching, always. I could feel it peering in through my window. It never just observed. It wanted. It desired. Dr. Holloway, please don't misunderstand me, but I believe what you're experiencing is a manifestation of your fear. And I'm not dismissing your experience as unreal or intangible. But I'm suggesting that if we can identify and address this fear, whatever you're seeing may leave you alone. Clara. Dr. Vivian Holloway, maiden name Sterling. Dr. Holloway. How do you know that? Clara, you attended Crestwood University and lived in this state your entire life. You moved to Silent Hollow 6 years ago, and you suffered a miscarriage when you were 22. Dr. Holloway, Clara. Clara, stop. Clara, your father died in a car accident when you were 5, and your mother raised you alone since. She's currently battling diabetes, and you're terrified you'll develop it too because of your family history and dash. Dr. Holloway abruptly leaps from her chair, knocking it over, I presume. Dr. Holloway, Clara. Stop this. How? How do you know all of this? Clara, it's in the room, with us. Dr. Holloway presumably picks up her chair and sits back down. She laughs aloud to herself, likely in disbelief. Dr. Holloway, what is it, Clara? Clara, its name is Sweet Tooth. It loves to eat sweet things. Dr. Holloway, where is it? Where in the room is it right now? Clara. Dr. Holloway, Clara, where is it? Clara, it's standing right next to you. At this point in the tape, everything falls silent for a full 5 seconds. Dr. Holloway then gasps audibly but remains seated. The sheer terror in her voice as she concluded the tape sent shivers down my spine when I first listened to it. Dr. Holloway. I can feel it breathing down my neck. The tape abruptly cuts off after Holloway's chilling confession. Shortly after this session, Clara was last seen fleeing into the woods. Dr. Holloway also descended into catatonia and was institutionalized, convinced that her imaginary friend, Sweet Tooth, wanted her to die so they could be together forever. I joined the search parties that scoured the woods for Clara Bellwether, hoping to find her, and the only lead I had to the disappearances plaguing Silent Hollow's children. Sweet Tooth. I assembled a team of detectives to assist me, and the police force, spurred by the mention of a suspect, finally decided to launch a serious investigation for the first time in years. The initial days of the search yielded little. The most peculiar occurrence was the search dogs consistently leading us to barren, empty trees and to the creek. More officers joined the search efforts as additional children vanished into the woods during our investigation, and a considerable number of civilians volunteered to help as well. A detail that particularly struck me was when I mapped the last known locations of each missing child. Not only had they all disappeared in the woods, including Leo Maxwell, whose house was nestled deep within the forest, but their disappearance points formed a perfect triangle encircling the Blackwood mansion. One early search, however, stood out. A few colleagues and I ventured into the woods near the Blackwood mansion. The night was pitch black, dense fog permeated every corner of the forest, and save for us, the air was devoid of sound. No crickets, no frogs, not even the hoot of an owl. Silence, punctuated only by the occasional bark of a search dog and the rustling of dead leaves underfoot. Our flashlights offered little aid, the beams seemingly swallowed by the fog just inches ahead. About an hour into the woods, I was startled by an officer's shout, "Hey! I think I've found something." The hurried rush towards him was laced with a tread that felt like bricks crushing my lungs. Was it Clara? Was it her body? These questions raced through my mind, leaving a void of dread where my stomach should have been. It turned out to be a bundle of sticks, leaves, and rocks. They were snapped and bound together in a bizarre formation resembling some kind of rune. Imagine a crude drawing of a vaguely triangular rune here. Right beside it, 3 piles of rocks formed a triangular arrangement around the makeshift figure. We photographed it for evidence, but found nothing else of significance that night. It's strange to me now how nonchalantly we treated the sticks and rocks, because from that point onward, they became a recurring element of every search. We were guaranteed to find at least a few of those stick figures, invariably accompanied by rock piles forming a triangle around them. My next noteworthy event occurred about 3 weeks into our search. We trudged through the damp woods, this time in the early evening. It was unsettling to be in those woods and actually hear and see wildlife. Crows cawed, moths clung to tree bark, and the occasional swan call echoed from the nearby creek. I recall discovering a faint trail and following it with a few colleagues and a search dog. The trail became increasingly obscure, twisting and turning through the forest seemingly at random. Eventually, we stumbled upon a bizarre sight. Dolls scattered amongst the trees. They were all visibly decaying, weathered by the elements for an indeterminate amount of time. We followed the trail of decaying dolls until they led us to a hidden nook in the path, which opened into a concealed area within the Blackwood estate. What we discovered was unbelievably unsettling. Beyond a rusted gate lay a small, overgrown gravesite. It wasn't a city cemetery, and it was never documented as belonging to or being created by the Blackwoods. Even stranger, the headstones bore the names of people yet to die. It was around this discovery that a colleague pointed out something eerie. Silence. No more birdsong, no insect buzz, even the sound of our own footsteps on the leaves seemed muffled. We photographed the gravesite and quickly retreated. We retraced our steps up the trail to rejoin the other officers and detectives, but our search dog abruptly halted about halfway back. I remember her owner, Search and Rescue Officer Davies, tugging on her leash to urge her forward, but she remained rooted to the spot. She stared intently into the dense forest, alert and fixated on something. We waited for her to calm down and continue, but her tail was clamped firmly between her legs, and the fur on her back was raised like a porcupine's quills. Something unseen was terrifying her. As Davies attempted to pull her away and back onto the path, she unleashed the lowest, most bone-chilling growl I've ever heard from a dog. Unwilling to risk finding out what provoked such a reaction, I hurried back up the path. My sudden movement seemed to startle the dog, snapping her out of whatever trance she was in, and she reluctantly followed us. The chills that coursed through my body were enough to propel me up that trail, and as I glanced back at my colleagues, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something in the woods. It resembled a flowing, stained white dress drifting behind a tree. Instinct overriding my earlier fear, I plunged into the woods without hesitation. I rushed towards the tree where I was certain I'd just seen a girl, and nothing. My colleagues caught up, except for Davies and the dog, who remained frozen at the path's edge, the dog still visibly terrified. Before I could speak, an officer bent down and picked something up from the forest floor. A photograph that will be forever etched into my memory. A pale corpse, waterlogged and decaying, clad in a flowing white dress. Clara. The following days mirrored the grim pattern of those preceding them. No fresh leads, no glimmers of hope, only a growing list of disappearances. That was until the harrowing case of the Moreau family, which marked a chilling escalation. The Moreaus were, by all accounts, an ordinary family residing in the more populated outskirts of Silent Hollow. They seemed perfectly normal. No one could have foreseen the horrific events that unfolded. They murdered and cannibalized their own children, then ritualistically ended their own lives by hanging from the old oak in their front yard, their bodies swaying side by side with the mangled remains of their half-eaten children, Noah and Violet Moreau. This case became infamous for one macabre detail discovered at the scene. Noah's diary, which chillingly detailed his parents' encounters with a neighbor who went by the name Sweet Tooth. This became a horrifying trend, seemingly random couples in Silent Hollow succumbing to murder-suicides, and if they had children, unspeakable cannibalism followed. It was a Friday evening I had my own brush with this Sweet Tooth. My house was quiet as I pored over the crime scene details. Each case echoed the same terrifying pattern. The couple would encounter a new neighbor calling himself Sweet Tooth. He would insinuate himself into their lives, becoming a familiar presence. Across all the diaries, text messages, saved calls, and notes, a disturbing theme emerged. The couples became convinced of the insignificance of earthly life. Each family, brainwashed by this Sweet Tooth, was persuaded to relinquish their mortal forms and liberate their souls to some otherworldly deity. It must have been around an hour later, as dusk deepened and night enveloped the woods around my house in an inky blackness. I finished reviewing the diaries, notes, drawings, and crime scene photos, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This line of work truly takes its toll, especially when you're immersed in cases like this. It becomes emotionally crushing. I felt an overwhelming need to call my mother. The details of these incidents were deeply unsettling. A sudden urge washed over me to tell her how much I loved her. I was barely 5 minutes into the call when something flickered in my peripheral vision in my backyard. A flash of white, a flowing dress. I abruptly apologized to my mother, mumbled an excuse, and hung up. Bursting out of my house, magnum in hand, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, I scanned my yard. Silence, absolute, unnerving silence. As I moved through the darkness of my yard, I felt the blood drain from my face. A soft giggle echoed through the eerily still woods, and I swung my flashlight towards the imposing tree-line. Nothing seemed amiss, but a wave of dread washed over me, constricting my chest until I felt I couldn't breathe. I meticulously scanned the tree-line, frustration mounting as whatever was taunting me remained unseen. 30 seconds must have passed before I decided to abandon my futile, fear-fueled search and return inside. But then, something horrifying stopped me dead in my tracks. Lurking there, at the window by my desk, was a young boy, maybe 12 years old, with a brunette bowl cut and a garishly bright turtleneck. Hugo Maxwell. I cautiously approached the window as he seemed to glide out of sight, and in the darkened hallway within my house, a tall, indistinct figure detached itself from the shadows of my room and moved towards the front door. I burst inside and conducted a frantic, military-style sweep of my house, not a soul to be found. I returned to my desk, the spot where Hugo had been, and it took a moment for the bizarre scene to register. My case files were scattered across the desk, the names of the murder-suicide families circled on my silent hollow map, forming a perfect triangle, with the ominous Blackwood mansion positioned precisely at the triangle center. A palpable sense of unease lingered in the air. My home no longer felt like a sanctuary but a chilling stage for some unseen horror. An irresistible impulse seized me. I had to investigate the ruins of the Blackwood mansion. I went to my bedroom to grab my coat, and that's when I noticed it, a cassette tape lying in the center of my bed. Curiosity overriding caution, I picked it up and slid it into the player. Dr. Holloway, Clara. Clara, it's speaking to you. Dr. Holloway audibly recoiled, her chair crashing as Clara yelped in surprise. Dr. Holloway, Clara. What is it? What is it saying? Tell it to leave me alone. I can feel its breath on me. Make it stop. Dr. Holloway was clearly hysterical, screaming and sobbing, retreating from the tape recorder as if it were a venomous snake. Dr. Holloway, make it leave me alone, Clara. What in God's name is it saying? Clara, it's saying, Sweet Tooth, you're so sweet, Evelyn. The sound of my name spoken on the tape hit me like a physical blow, a fist slamming into my gut. I bolted to my car, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I don't think I've ever driven so recklessly in my life. Red lights were meaningless. I had to get to the station, had to find this thing. I rallied a handful of officers, and we sped towards the Blackwood mansion. The drive down the winding, overgrown roads felt like an agonizing eternity, each missing child poster along the roadside a mocking taunt. Finally, we reached the decrepit street where it stood, the Blackwood mansion, its jagged, malevolent architecture looming over Silent Hollow. The windows appeared as vacant, malevolent eyes, swallowed by the night's blackness. The mansion wasn't secured, its massive front doors grown open like the sighs of tormented souls. Stepping inside, the air was thick, heavy, almost solid, and the floorboards shrieked underfoot with every step, as if in protest. The house reeked of copper, decaying fish, and the putrid stench of garbage left to fester in the summer heat. It was clear no one had occupied the mansion since the Blackwoods. Their belongings, their furniture, lay scattered and decaying, forgotten relics of a cursed past. 2 of the 4 officers and I cautiously descended into the basement after clearing the eerily silent first floor, while the remaining 2 officers ascended the creaking staircase to the upper levels. It wasn't long before my team and I stumbled upon a horrifying discovery in the basement: the bloated, waterlogged corpse of Clara Bellwether. We tried to radio the officers upstairs, but our walkie-talkies crackled with only a vicious static. One of my officers went to find them while the other and I continued to search the remainder of the basement. We located a cellar, sealed off, boarded up long ago, presumably by the Blackwoods after the mansion's construction. Despite the gruesome discovery of Clara's body, the cellar seemed to be the epicenter of the overwhelming stench. It was an acrid, burnt hair smell that permeated every corner of my nostrils, clinging to the back of my throat. My increasingly desperate attempts to pry open the cellar door were futile, and I soon realized I was working alone. My gaze snapped to my remaining officer, a young man named Diaz. Even in the oppressive darkness, I could see his eyes were wide with terror, his gun drawn, pointed towards the far corner of the basement. I followed his line of sight. Standing in the corner, almost swallowed by the darkness yet somehow darker than the surrounding shadows, was a figure that defied description. It had to be at least 7.5 feet tall, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, and possibly tall for the low basement ceiling. The sound of dripping water suddenly filled my ears as my eyes struggled to adjust to the amorphous thing before us. It seemed to shudder in the corner, emitting a guttural noise. Breathing, I suppose, is the closest I can come to describing the raw, rasping sound it made. But as soon as I raised my flashlight beam, nothing. The corner was empty. Whatever had been there had vanished. Just then, a violent commotion erupted from upstairs. Diaz and I abandoned our search, rushing past the spot where Clara Bellwether's corpse had lain moments before, now eerily absent, and scrambled up the basement stairs in a surge of panic. The other 3 officers practically tumbled down the second-floor staircase, their faces pale with horror. Their fragmented, terrified accounts were almost too unbelievable to process. The senior female officer, Matthews, had opened a closet door in one of the children's bedrooms. Drawn by a nauseating stench emanating from the crawl space in the lower corner of the closet, she pried it open. The Blackwood mansion has since been systematically gutted, reduced to a hollow shell, all because of what Officer Matthews unearthed, revealing Silent Hollow's most horrifying secret. Inside the walls, beneath the floors, within the ceilings and yards of that cursed house, lay the skeletal and decaying remains of hundreds of missing children. The Blackwood mansion was demolished shortly after, and the remains of those poor souls were finally laid to rest. The only structure left standing is the cellar. I don't know if they couldn't breach it, or if they simply recoiled from confronting whatever further horrors it might contain, but it remains there, a silent sentinel in the woods where the Blackwood mansion once stood, a gaping wound on the landscape. That brings me to the present. I left Silent Hollow in the year 2000. The chilling certainty that something profoundly dangerous was out there, and that I was directly in its path, became unbearable. But the mysteries of that place have never truly left me. What lay hidden within that cellar, so tightly sealed by the Blackwoods? What was Sweet Tooth? And what did it crave from the children and families of Silent Hollow? A gnawing fear persists that whatever Sweet Tooth was, it's still out there. Clara Bellwether's body was never recovered. And disturbingly, there's been a surge of missing children's cases, not just in my current jurisdiction, but across the entire Mid-Atlantic region. Be vigilant. That cellar, It became an obsession. Even after escaping Silent Hollow, it haunted my waking thoughts and invaded my nightmares. What secrets were entombed within its boarded-up depths? Was Sweet Tooth still lurking in the shadows, tethered to that cursed land? The questions gnawed at me, relentless and unsettling. Years passed. I tried to bury the memories of Silent Hollow, to convince myself it was a closed case, a chapter of my life firmly shut. I threw myself into new cases, new cities, new routines. But Silent Hollow had sunk its hooks deep. The faces of Martha Maxwell, the chilling tape of Clara Bellwether, the vacant, malevolent stare of the Blackwood Mansion, they were all etched into my mind, refusing to fade. Then came the reports. Whispers at first, then louder, more insistent. Missing children. Not just in one town, not just in one state, but scattered across the mid-Atlantic. Maryland. Pennsylvania. Even here, in my new city, echoes of Silent Hollow began to surface. The descriptions were always vague, unsettlingly similar. Children vanishing from their homes, from wooded areas, sometimes near creeks or rivers. No witnesses, no ransom demands, just gone. And then, the whispers of a name. Sweet Tooth. It started subtly. A frantic mother in Philadelphia recounted her son talking about a new friend with that name before he disappeared from his locked bedroom. A distraught father in Baltimore mentioned finding strange stick figures and rock piles near where his daughter was last seen playing in the woods. A terrified babysitter in rural Pennsylvania swore she saw a tall, shadowy figure lurking outside the window just before the child in her care vanished from his crib. Sweet Tooth. The name, once confined to the cursed town of Silent Hollow, was spreading like a contagion. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The pattern was undeniable, chillingly familiar. It was Silent Hollow all over again, but on a terrifyingly larger scale. The fear that had driven me away from Occoquan now propelled me back towards its dark heart. I had to know. I had to confront whatever malevolent entity had taken root in that town, whatever was now reaching out, spreading its tendrils of terror across the region. I packed a bag, loaded my car, and drove back to Virginia. As I neared Silent Hollow, the familiar dread began to creep back, a cold hand clenching around my gut. The woods seemed darker, denser, more menacing than I remembered. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid, faintly sweet, and deeply unsettling. Pulling onto the deserted road leading to the former Blackwood estate, the silence was deafening. The houses were still there, decaying, abandoned, monuments to a forgotten horror. But the Blackwood mansion was gone. Just an empty space where it had once stood, a raw scar on the hillside. Except for the cellar. The cellar remained, a dark, gaping maw in the earth, surrounded by overgrown weeds and twisted trees. Armed with my service weapon and a heavy-duty flashlight, I approached the cellar. The boarded-up entrance was still intact, weathered and rotting, but stubbornly sealed. The air around it was colder, heavier, the silence more profound. I could feel a palpable sense of rawness emanating from the earth around the cellar, a feeling of ancient, slumbering evil. Taking a crowbar from my trunk, I began to pry at the boards. They were old, brittle, but held firm. The wood groaned and splintered under the pressure, the sound echoing unnervingly in the stillness. Finally, with a last, desperate heave, the boards gave way, collapsing inwards with a hollow thud, revealing a dark, gaping opening. The stench that erupted from the cellar was overwhelming, instantly assaulting my senses. It was the same sickeningly sweet, burnt hair smell I remembered from the Blackwood basement, intensified, amplified. I gagged, pulling my shirt up over my nose and mouth, but the stench still clawed at my lungs, making my eyes water. Hesitantly, I shone my flashlight into the opening. Darkness. Absolute, impenetrable darkness. The beam of my flashlight seemed to be swallowed whole, revealing nothing but an abyss. I could hear a faint dripping sound from within, the same sound I remembered from that terrifying night in the Blackwood basement. Taking a deep breath, steeling my nerves, I lowered myself into the cellar opening. The air inside was even colder, the stench even more overpowering. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rough-hewn stone walls, slick with moisture, descending into the earth. The dripping sound was louder now, echoing in the confined space. As I descended further, the beam of my flashlight finally caught something at the bottom of the cellar. A shape. Amorphous, shifting, coalescing in the darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form indistinct, wavering like heat haze. And then, I saw it. A glint of white. A flowing, stained white dress. Clara. Or what was left of her. But it wasn't just Clara. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering down from the cellar opening, I saw them. Dozens of them. Scattered around the base of the cellar walls, slumped against the damp stone, piled in grotesque heaps. Children. Skeletal remains, tattered clothing, matted hair clinging to bone. The missing children of Silent Hollow. And in the center of them all, the tall, shifting figure, draped in what looked like, yes, a stained, flowing white dress. The figure turned, slowly, deliberately, towards me. And I saw it then, in the dim light, the grotesque parody of a face. Too large, too pale, features blurred and indistinct, like melting wax. And the mouth, a gaping maw filled with rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth, glistening wetly in the darkness. Sweet tooth. A low, rasping sound emanated from it, the same breathing sound from the Blackwood basement, but closer now, directed at me. And then, a voice, a sibilant whisper that seemed to slither directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. "You're so sweet, Evelyn." Terror seized me, paralyzing, absolute. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs were leaden, unresponsive. Sweet Tooth began to move, slowly, deliberately, its towering form shifting through the piles of bones, towards me. The dripping sound intensified, and I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, that it wasn't water. It was saliva. Sweet Tooth's saliva, dripping from its monstrous maw, anticipation, hunger, radiating from it in waves. And then, just as it reached the edge of my flashlight beam, just as I felt its fetid breath on my face, I woke up. I was sitting bolt upright in my bed, drenched in a cold sweat, heart hammering against my ribs. The room was dark, silent, save for the frantic pounding of my own heart. Sunlight was just beginning to filter through the curtains. It was morning. Just a nightmare. Thank God, just a nightmare. But as I slowly calmed down, as the adrenaline receded, I noticed something. A faint, lingering scent in the air. Acrid, sweet, burnt hair. And on my nightstand, beside my bed, something that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. A single, crudely fashioned stick figure, tied with twine, surrounded by 3 small piles of pebbles, arranged in a perfect triangle. Be careful. It might not just be a nightmare. It might be closer than you think. I'm uploading this here separate from my usual case files. You'll get why soon enough. Truth is, it just felt wrong lumping it in with the endless stream of cheating spouse logs and runaway teen trackers. Honestly, I almost didn't type this up at all. Burning it felt like the right move. I'd have been more than happy to pretend this whole thing never happened. But I changed my mind, figured silence might just leave someone else stumbling down the same rabbit hole. So yeah, my story. What you're about to read went down back in the early 2010s. Didn't know it when I signed the initial contract with Evelyn Reed, but it was the last case I ever took as a private investigator. Something about the whole gig just felt off afterwards. Don't think you'll blame me for switching careers to debt collection, though. Strangely fitting, in hindsight. It started out mundane enough. Got the call on Monday morning, nursing a hangover with a mug of black coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in. Bangkok's a sprawling city, and I'm good at finding people in it. My caseload was never light, put it that way. Phone ringing first thing Monday wasn't unusual. What piqued my interest, enough to bump it to the top of my list, was the nature of the case. The caller was Evelyn Reed, 56, from Sukhumvit. The case? Her son, David. Specifically, what the Bangkok Metropolitan Police weren't telling her about his death. Evelyn didn't buy the BMP's verdict of suicide. When she showed up at my makeshift office that afternoon, basically a corner of my apartment, she brought screenshots of private chats. Screenshots filled with her son's plans, dreams, future hopes. The most recent was about booking a trip to Koh Lanta, written just hours before his supposed self-inflicted demise. On their own, these might have screamed grieving mother in denial. But then she slid across the photos she'd snapped of his body when she went to identify him at the morgue. Sure, David was covered head to toe in deep cuts. His nose was busted, and his naked body was coated in grime, like he'd been sleeping in a back alley dumpster. It was the body of someone who'd been through hell in their last hours. I agree with Evelyn Reed, though. This wasn't the body of a guy who'd checked himself out. Folks who choose their own ending don't die with a silent scream etched on their faces. David was found about 3 days dead in a parking garage behind a derelict building near Unnut. Drugs were in his system, but not at levels that screamed danger or overdose. Evelyn's research was meticulous, and I'd chased enough junkie kids to confirm the charts she showed me pointed to nothing more than a 19-year-old adding a little extra kick to his weekend buzz. The cuts, coupled with the negligible party favors in his system, led the BMP to slap a suicide label on it. To Evelyn's relief, I disagreed on both counts. The wounds couldn't have been self-inflicted. Too many inch-long gashes in places David couldn't have reached himself. And hundreds of them. He'd have passed out from blood loss long before getting to the 2 fatal wrist slashes. Those were also too clean, too precise to be his own work. No blade was found on David, so the official line was broken glass. Been in enough bar brawls to know shards of glass can't make cuts that surgical. But the big question, the one that screamed loudest in my head, was this: David Reed's body was filthy, lacerated, so where the hell was all the blood? The BMP wasn't leveling with Evelyn Reed, and I promised her I'd find out why. Shame is, once I did, I had to start being dishonest with her too. Not because I'm a liar, but because I couldn't risk her digging any deeper. My first stop was the possible crime scene. David had been found by a street vendor in a deserted industrial area off Sukhumvit 77. Turned out to be a wasted BTS ticket, at least for that initial trip. The BMP had already swept the place clean, and a week's worth of Bangkok's humid air and street traffic had long since washed away anything they might have missed. Kinda figured that'd be the case before I even got there. But I needed a starting point, and in my usual runaway kid hunts, hitting the last known location was a decent way to pick up a scent. So yeah, I didn't linger too long in that empty parking garage that first time. The second time, the time I woke up there, that's a whole different story. We'll get to that, though. Back then, I had no reason to be suspicious. I did need to fire off some phone photos to Evelyn Reed, though. More to show her I was on it than anything else. That's why I ducked into the shadowy internet cafe/money exchange joint across the street from the vacant lot of warehouses and abandoned cars. The cramped, dimly lit room was buzzing. Two beefy guys behind the counter, and maybe a dozen skinny dudes hunched over keyboards, crammed into a space built for maybe 8 people max. They all had this jumpy look about them. Nobody made eye contact, not with me, not even with each other. Just silent, focused work. All you could hear was the whirring of tower PCs, the tap-tap-tap of keys, and the drone of some fat housefly doing drunken loops around the ceiling fan. Wasn't until I sat down and fired up the ancient Windows 98 machine that I noticed the silence wasn't just the customers. No speakers. None of the dirt cheap PCs had M. Not even tinny, badly tuned type pop blasting from behind the counter. Weird, even for Bangkok. Then I saw it. The towers were also missing headphone or AUX jacks. The audio cable slots on both my machine and the one next to me had been crudely melted shut, probably with a lighter or a mini blowtorch. Wish I'd been curious enough to dig into that little detail. Would have saved myself a world of pain later. But back then? Just shrugged it off, emailed the new crime scene photos to Evelyn Reed, chalking the massive red flag up to just another one of Bangkok's weird little moments. My second line of inquiry was Evelyn's list of David's friends. One of them, a kid based near Siam Square, agreed to meet. Aspiring architect named Ponsakorn Pong Srisawat, another former classmate of the deceased. Surprised to find Pong was as eager to meet me as I was him. He'd been with David the night he died. Had video evidence to prove it, too. After some quick intros at his Siam condo, mine clipped and impatient, his shaky and hushed, he showed me a series of clips on his iPhone. I'll spare you the red herring, the illegal rave Pong, David, and a handful of other future city planners had hit that night wasn't in the warehouse. I'd soon wake up outside, sweating and babbling like a lunatic. It was a similar derelict unit about a kilometer away, one regularly used for these underground events, judging by the intricate sound system and lighting rigs visible on the small screen. The first few videos were normal enough. David and his friends laughing, dancing, maybe catching a noseful of yaba off some coffee table. It was the fourth video that drained the color from both our faces. About 30 seconds into this clip, almost out of shot by the speaker a few feet behind a grinning Pong and two girls, David changed. Not started changing. Changed. Instantaneously. One frame, David Reed, all smiles and moves. The next. Not. In the space of a single strobe flash, David went from grinning and dancing to standing ramrod straight. So tense and upright you'd swear some unseen spirit had jammed a steel rod straight up his spine, all the way to his skull. Plenty of the other ravers had twisted, contorted faces. Party drugs do that. Probably why none of them reacted to David's new face with the same gut punch, sharp inhale I did. One moment, David's features were locked in a happy, toothy grin. Next frame, still a toothy grin all right, but far from happy. Far from anything human. After the switch, the corners of David's mouth curled up, spiraling almost into themselves. The lips stretched so tight they split, tiny trickles of blood blooming within seconds. New eyes bulged out, way further than any chemical could force. Rings of bruised purple flesh circled them as they twitched and heaved in their sockets, like they were trying to claw their way free of his face. His eyelids folded back and inwards, exposing the pulsing veins and capillaries underneath. Over the next 5 or 6 videos, Pun showed me David standing stock still in the same spot, that same twisted grin plastered on his face, filmed from different angles. No matter where Pun filmed from, the bolt-upright David was visible in the background, unmoving for what must have been a couple hours. Pun had studied the footage, because he pointed out the weird way David was breathing before I even noticed. Impressive, considering I made a decent living out of noticing things. David Reed was alternating lungs. Left then right, nostrils flaring in short, arrhythmic bursts. He stood there, swaying almost imperceptibly as opposing halves of his chest rose and fell like a seesaw, right up until the final 2 videos. I'm a proud man. Value my stoicism. Brings me zero joy admitting I let out a high-pitched yelp when, in the second-to-last clip, the grinning statue did the unthinkable. It moved. On a trigger known only to whatever mind was behind those bulging eyes, the David thing spun 180 degrees on its left heel. Marched through the throng of blissed-out ravers, legs swinging stiff but fluid, like a parade soldier or a 50s wind-up toy. Before the footage cut, it was standing in front of a man-sized speaker, face inches from the vibrating surface. The last footage was Pun puking bright purple liquid into a trash can. Over his shoulder, David Reed was clearly visible. He was ramming his head into the speaker with such force his skull rattled violently. Held it there solid for a full 5 minutes, until dark streaks started oozing from his ears, pooling at his chin. Before the clip went black, I caught a glimpse of his mangled, broken face. The curled grin was gone, nose was smashed, and the blood from the fresh wound mixed with what looked like confused tears. David vanished after that. Pun Srisawat agreed to send me the footage, on the condition I never contacted him again. Crystal clear he'd only reached out to pass the torch, so to speak. He was done. I should have taken his lead. Hindsight's a bitch, ain't it? I uploaded the clips to YouTube when I got back to my apartment, then crashed for a few hours. Standard pro gamer move in the PI world, actually. If someone's hiding, they can't resist testing how findable they are. Besides, I was clueless what the hell I was even looking at. Just as much hoping for an explanation of the kind of psychotic break that caused David's behavior as I was for another lead. Figured neurological was the angle, you understand. Something still grounded in the rational, the explainable. Woke up a few hours later, still no explanation. But I did have another lead. Buried in the hundreds of fake comments protecting my video montage from a takedown, one offered a sliver of hope. Well, what I thought was hope back then. What was it that Red Squid Dude said in Star Wars? Anyway, one commenter left a lengthy reply, urging me to reach out. Poster claimed to have seen the exact same thing in another nightclub a few months back, and had video to prove it. My mind started racing, visions of front-page headlines, Hero PI exposes deadly new rave drug sweeping Bangkok. Couldn't reply to Speakerwriter 81 fast enough. Fist pumped when he messaged back in 5 minutes, saying he lived so close I could be at his door in 10. The trip was short, but not simple. BlackBerry Maps took me down alleys and side streets I didn't even know existed, even after living in the area for over a decade. The din of the main roads faded with each turn, the orange glow of light pollution I usually associated with civilization getting fainter and fainter on each new, unfamiliar street. My phone swore the trip had only taken 10 minutes when I reached the right row of townhouses in the maze of townhouses. Felt longer, though, legs ached to prove it. Apart from a dim hall light on the second floor of the first house I passed, a mangy soy dog rooting through a tipped-over bin was the only sign of life. Shiver ran down my spine, even though the night air was still thick and humid. Speakerwriter 81 lived at house number 12 on this dead-end street. Knocked on the red wooden door, no lights on in this house either, and found it unlocked, swinging inwards with a soft push of my knuckles. Walked in half expecting signs of a break-in, maybe a struggle. Squat full of junkies, even. What I didn't expect was the cleanest, emptiest house I'd ever stepped foot in. This place wasn't just uninhabited by people, but by anything. Spent nearly 2 hours pulling up floorboards, rummaging through empty cupboards, convinced I'd wasted my time on what now felt like an obvious prank. Well, at first it felt like a prank. The longer I spent tearing the house apart, though, the more my frantic searching regained a solid purpose. Something was wrong with that house. Couldn't put my finger on what until I found it. First guess was show home, but even those are decked out with some kind of furniture beyond built-in closets. The house's exterior was filthy, run down, like the rest of the street. Inside, couldn't have been more different. Except for the bare concrete floors and exposed subfloor, even the kitchen and bathroom were tile and linoleum free. Every surface had been scrubbed sterile. Recently, too. Some of the walls were still damp, faint, acrid tang of bleach still hanging in the air. What furniture remained, the built-in cupboards, wall-mounted sinks, bathroom fixtures, had gotten the same treatment. Scrubbed immaculate. Doubt I could have found a flake of dead skin, never mind Speakerwriter 81 or his case-breaking video. Finally gave up, pulled out my phone to call a cab. Poor woman on the other end hadn't heard of the address, and neither had her dispatch system. One too many helpings of weirdness for one night. Red haze started creeping into my vision. My profanity-laced attempts to explain my location got loud. That's why I didn't hear the guy with the cricket bat unlock the front door. Woke up strapped to a chair. Top of my skull throbbed, and when I moved, I could feel the flaking of dried blood at the back of my neck. Wasn't alone. 3 of the beefy guys from the internet cafe/money exchange stood over me. They weren't sticking around, though. Barely enough time to start yelling at them, reminding them I recognized them, knew exactly who they were, when they wordlessly turned and filed out through a heavy steel door. The room that clanged shut behind them was as unsettlingly sterile as Speakerwriter 81's house. Knew I must have been moved at least a few kilometers, because the vents and pipes sneaking across the whitewashed brick walls screamed industrial warehouse. Smell of bleach was stronger here, strong enough to make you cough and gag, even through the thick straps holding me in place. Other smells, too. Disinfectant, chlorine, other cleaning chemical fumes that stung the nostrils, burned the lungs. For a second, I worried they were gassing me. But when the real reason they brought me here revealed itself, realized I wasn't that lucky. Only thing in the room besides me and the chair was a small Bluetooth speaker, perched alone on the polished concrete floor a few feet in front of me. One of those portable jobs, couldn't have been bigger than my fist. Seconds after I focused on it, the green LED blinked to life, signaling a paired connection. The music it spat into the echoing room was tinny, warbling mix of pure treble, zero bass. Tune itself wasn't remarkable. Some pop hit from that summer, Katy Perry or Taylor Swift, maybe? How much the screeching tones made my face itch, though, that grabbed my attention fast. Started yanking, pulling against the thick straps, no longer trying to get free, just wanted a hand up to scratch my face. Within seconds, the unpleasant scratch across every inch of my face had me twisting in agony. Yellow started bleeding into the red haze. Before I could even scream, though, there was a click. The glare of the strip light overhead cut out, plunging the bleach-stank room into darkness. Took me completely by surprise. Surprise I didn't have long to wallow in. Muscles in my back tensed. Moment the light went, felt something other than shadow step in to take its place. Something behind me, a presence as real as the leather straps keeping me pinned to the chair. Couldn't hear it, but I knew from the prickling crawling of my neck, replacing the itch of dried blood, that it was taking slow, deliberate steps towards me. Scream then. Loud scream, the kind even the hyper-masculine bravado I inherited from my old man wouldn't be ashamed of. When those screams bounced and echoed off the hidden walls, that's when I noticed they, and the waves of tinny noise from the speaker, weren't behaving right. Not reverberating evenly around the room like they should have been. They were being directed. Every yell, every screech of pop music rushed back past my ears, way louder on the return trip. Every sound zipped inward like a passing freight train, pulled behind me, either by or into whatever was now gut-churningly close to the back of my neck. The itching on my face had burned into scalding by then, as had the hot breath on the back of my neck. Wrenched against the straps so hard warm rivers of red trickled down from fresh flares of pain at my wrists and ankles. My yells, pleas, screams, all sucked behind me, whooshing past my ears, vanishing without echo or reverb. Scalding breath moved up to behind my left ear. Corners of my mouth felt more and more like they were soaked in acid with every inch it crept. Must have still been screaming, but I couldn't hear it anymore. The sonic barrage ripped through every bone, every ligament in my body, crushing, squeezing with an impossible pressure I can't explain. Don't ever want to again, either. Excruciating vibrations reached their final crescendo when the thing they gave form to placed a clawed, bleach-reeking hand on my shoulder. Everything stopped. Instantaneously, the burning, the crushing pressure inside me, the boiling grip of that gnarled, translucent hand, gone. Would have been a relief, if everything else hadn't gone with it. My limbs, moments ago screaming in agony against leather straps, vanished. Throbbing eyes no longer throbbed, because they no longer were. Screaming stopped, because I had no mouth to scream with. I was nothing but disembodied awareness. Bodiless dread, wilting sanity, drifting alone in a void. At least, alone at first. Once I registered the lack of surroundings, things started noticing me. Things that shifted and moved in the dark, curious things, intrigued by movement in this place where all had been still since before there was a universe to birth our son in. I could feel, or sense, or know, them circling. Their hunger was palpable, filled the empty space. If I'd had lungs, the fear I became would have burst them. Felt the first of these unspeakable presences crash into me when, for the second time, everything stopped. Felt tarmac against my cheek. Didn't amaze me as much as the fact I could feel my cheek at all, feel my face, my arms, legs, all the bits I was supposed to have. They ached, but they weren't burning. Two damn good reasons to open my eyes. I was in a parking garage by a derelict building. Same parking garage that unfortunate street vendor found even more unfortunate David Reed's body in. Naked, bruised, a few cuts, but alive. As memories of how I'd ended up naked, hurt, and sprawled on concrete started flooding back, so did a fresh wave of panic. Ran screaming from that parking garage. Looking up, seeing the three guys from that sterile room, one of them holding the cricket bat, watching from a top floor window, was enough. Their hate-filled stares screamed the message, warning. Don't go poking where you ain't wanted. At first, I thought they were worried I'd exposed them. Now, I know better. Never took another case after that. Shut down my PILTD, websites, social media, everything. But not before spending 8 hours straight sobbing under a cold shower. Never gone back to a nut since. Don't know if those things, whatever the hell happened, is limited to that area. Avoided spending too long around speakers in the years since, just in case. Paranoia's a hell of a thing. Told Evelyn Reed the trail went cold. What else could I do? She broke down, a mess of uncontrollable sobs. That's when I first noticed something had shifted in me. Her tears meant nothing. No pity, no annoyance. Just blank. Emotionally neutered. Been the same ever since. Psychiatrist throws around words like sociopath, personality disorder. But I know better. When that thing touched my core in the void, it took something with it. Left me half empty, missing whatever sliver of spirit or soul lets you connect with other people. Probably why I'm so good at debt collection now. Sight of crying mothers, sobbing kids, doesn't even register as noise as I break some deadbeat dad's arm over a few thousand baht in missed gambling payments. That's why I'm warning you off digging. Don't want to risk anyone else following me down that rabbit hole. Terrified as I was, the thing in a knot, it blessed me. Chose me. I was worthy where David and those internet cafe thugs weren't. It's a burden, being chosen. One I wish I'd never shouldered. But now it's mine. And I'll never let it go. Those things in the dark, they're mine. Their blessing, mine. When I'm ready, I'll go back to a nut. I'll crank up the speakers, meet them again. Once more, I'll bask in their liberating touch. And I refuse to share it with anyone.